Good evening, all. It's 6:30 now, so I'll begin. Start off with the fire and evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and we'll meet in the War Memorial Park. Members, please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and if you have mobile devices, can you switch them off or turn them to silent? As we start then, is there any apologies for absence or substitutions?
Councillor Mark Hollandy's kitchen is flooding.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, and are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, brilliant. So the first thing that we'll go on to then is agenda item 4, which is minutes of the meeting held on 19th October 2022. Our committee agreed that the minutes of the meeting held on 19th October are an accurate record?
I've got one amendment.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I've got one amendment in relation to the potential future aquadrome facility mix. I felt one of the strong comments that came through was the feeling that the proposals for the aquadrome weren't ambitious enough, and that's not really reflected in talks about future proofing of the leisure park overall was very important, but I think could be added there. There was a concern that the proposals for the aquadrome weren't ambitious enough. There was some discussion about the size of the pool, etc., etc. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, is that agreed? Yeah. Okay then, so moving on to agenda item 5, we have the annual climate change and air quality strategy update. We've got the Cabinet Member, Councillor Ickes. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. Ickes, there you go, thank you. To introduce, followed by Mark Lambert. So I'll just pass over to Councillor Ickes.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, just a brief introduction from me. This report represents the second full annual update on the climate change and air quality strategy that was adopted 18 months ago. The strategy sets out our approach to tackling the climate emergency, which was declared back in 2019, and has in it our ambitious objectives to become carbon neutral as a council by 2025 and working towards a net zero borough overall by 2030. So the purpose of this evening in the paper is to set out how we are progressing against both those targets. You'll see in the paper it goes on to outline some of the key achievements that we've had this year, current areas of focus with work underway, and what future work we're looking and areas are highlighted in there. And there's also the action plan within the report as well. So it's just making clear that continuing to reduce council operational emissions is a priority for this council, and achieving carbon neutrality by 2025 is well within reach. We have already cut our net emissions by 2/3 since the declaration was made. We are keen to ensure that we take immediate action to account for current and historic emissions since the declaration of the climate emergency. And on that basis, many of you will be aware that at a recent cabinet meeting, we did make a decision to offset these emissions. This decision prioritises local carbon sequestration, I can never say that word, sequestration on our own land. And where that isn't possible, we've then agreed to invest in schemes that adhere to best practice standards to remove carbon from the atmosphere. This ensures that as well as continuing to invest in action to reduce our emissions, we are taking proactive ownership of these historic emissions and ensuring they observe absorbed by the natural environment. I did make absolutely clear at the Cabinet meeting when the offset and paper was taken that I personally, and I know the Cabinet and councillors and the officers, we don't see offsetting as the answer. We really don't see it as a cop-out. It was, it wasn't a decision that was taken lightly, but we just feel it's necessary, but it isn't the answer. And I don't want people to think that we've just done that and that we don't now have the appetite to continue to push forward to drive all our actions on the climate emergency. We do remain committed to reducing our emissions and do not see offsetting as the solution. But on the flip side of that, I think it would be negligent just to sit back and ignore the historic emissions and the impact that that has had. But I absolutely can assure you that the officers, the councillors as a whole still have that appetite to drive other actions forward. We're also, as a council, working hard with partners to tackle emissions across the borough. Although we have to take into account that our actual direct emissions only account for less than 1% of the total overall borough emissions. So meeting that 2030 target is reliant not just on what we can do. In fact, we can do so much, but it's actually action by lots of key organisations, not just the council, to include the county council or national government, but also we need to be able to enable and inspire our residents to do things, local businesses, because if everybody did something, even if it's just a little bit, it does literally all help. So it's bearing all that in mind as well. So I'll hand over to Mark, our officer, so he can just go through the paper in a bit more detail, and then we can open up to questions.
Great, thanks, Councillor Reaches. Yeah, just to add a little bit further detail to what Councillor Reaches has outlined, we are making good progress in reducing our operational emissions. Table 1 in the report highlights the emissions back in 2018-19 and year on year since we declared the emergency. So at the time that the emergency was declared back in 2018-19, our emissions totalled around 2,200 tonnes, and since that time we've reduced it to around 730. So as Councillor Reaches has said, we've reduced it by around 2/3. Some of the key things we've done to achieve that is a shift to a renewable energy contract, consolidation into one building from two that we previously had pre-lockdown, and a gradual shift to an electric fleet, as well as improvements in our building fabric generally. Councillor Reach has mentioned that the Borough Council's emissions only account for a small proportion of those in the wider borough, and that really reinforces the need to work with our partners and to enable residents to make a change. And some of the measures I'll touch on in a moment outline how we seek to do that. In terms of achievements over the past year, we published 2 web-based toolkits for residents and community groups to use. These were kind of tailored depending on how much money people wished to spend or how ambitious they felt. And we received some really good feedback on that, and we continue to update those toolkits as and when. We've benefited, or the residents have benefited from grant schemes more widely, and so far we've supported improvements of around £350,000 in people's homes. And we continue to move our fleet to being electric, and we're trialling HVO fuel, which is hydrogenated vegetable oil, in some of our operational fleet, which offers 90% fewer emissions than conventional fuel. And we continue to roll out EV chargers. We're currently in the process of installing additional ones. In terms of our current areas of focus, we're just receiving the results now of energy audits on our operational portfolio. This will allow us to work with our property colleagues to work up a capital programme in terms of investing in those to reduce emissions and energy use in the future. As per the draft Cabinet papers and the budget proposals, we are proposing, subject to endorsement of the budget next year, to establish a new green team to provide in-person and remote support for residents and business, really to focus on energy use, saving money, linking into transport and travel, and also waste and recycling. So we see this team as being really hands-on in supporting residents. So assuming the budget's approved, that's something we're keen to progress. We're also in the process of launching a new brand and identity called Sustainable Basingstoke, which will sit alongside the council's own brand, but allow us to tap into residents and support them more effectively without it being branded as such as a council initiative, which I think will benefit residents. And then in terms of transport, we're preparing a new council travel plan at the moment, having recently undertaken a staff survey. That will allow us to develop measures to support staff in getting to work by more sustainable modes. We're also looking to develop an EV, electric vehicle car club in the town for residents that don't own a car or don't wish to own a car, so that they can perhaps hire a car by the hour or for slightly longer periods of time. They're quite commonplace in more urban areas, and I think there's an appetite for these locally. Again, this is subject to budget approval. And we're continuing to look at energy efficiency opportunities locally as well, and securing funding from elsewhere. Just a couple of further points to highlight. Appendix 2 sets out much more detail in terms of the actions. There's an action plan, and that sets out where we've progressed actions, what actions have been added more recently. And then in Appendix 3 to the paper, we've set out a summary of 2 motions that were presented to Council last year. One was in respect of working with local housing associations and understanding their plans and investment proposals for improving the stock in the borough and more widely. And the second was an exemplar scheme called Park Erin, which is a housing development in South Wales, which is seen as leading the way in terms of sustainability. We brought those 2 issues together in a recent members advisory panel that met at the end of October, and had received presentations from Vivid and Sovereign, as well as somebody from Zero Energy who was involved in those Park Erin schemes. So you'll see in Appendix 3 there just a summary of the points made and the next steps moving on from those motions. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lambert. We'll move to the public speakers first, then we'll come back and we'll take some questions. So I'd like to ask Miss Sheila Peacock to come up first. You have 2 minutes. My fantastic colleague at the end there will be clock watching, and we'll give you a heads up.
Thank you. I thank the Borough Council for embracing the need to act urgently on the carbon emissions that are causing disastrous global warming. But I'm concerned they might not go far enough. So 2 points I want to make very different from each other. First of all, carbon sequestration in soil. The offsetting policy that you passed at Cabinet 11th of October includes absorb or sequester carbon on council-owned land and land that we manage on behalf of others through natural means. And the current research indicates that drought has a negative effect on soil carbon storage, particularly in wetlands, and that drought is expected to become more frequent and severe. So I'm wanting to ask what the Council's doing, first of all, to encourage the growth of wetlands and areas of healthy soil to offset this effect, and particularly to replace the soil that's going to be lost to the development at Manydown. And secondly, to account for the drought effect in any plan to get offset credits from other areas of the UK. So you might buy credits that are actually worthless because the ground that they're based on has dried out. My second point, say completely different, is to do with the care of the council staff while reducing carbon emissions. And I would just ask, please would you assure us that the reduction in office space and working from home policies include protection for the staff from cramped, stressful or unpleasant working conditions, both in the office and at home, which might be unsafe and lead to a loss of morale among your valuable staff. And have trade union safety reps been fully involved in planning these changes? And if the council's encouraging local employers to carry out the same kind of changes in their working practices, is it emphasising the importance of maintaining employees' welfare, for example, by giving them a right to disconnect? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming up and providing those points to us. I'll pass over to the portfolio holder, Councillor Eachus. Do you want to respond to that, or just not?
Yeah,
comments?
I'll ask Mark just to deal with the drought and wetlands issue, but on the staff issue, I mean, it's slightly different to climate change, but I'm sure it's right. But yeah, if Tom's happy to, it's not my staff. If Mark deals with the drought side.
Yeah, just picking up the point about the natural environment, I suppose. We're not so much reliant on wetlands in Basingstoke and Deane as some other areas are in terms of carbon sequestration. So I think we we're very much focused on the area that we manage, and much of that is green space rather than kind of wetland environment. So I don't believe that's a particular concern, although I note that we have had periods of drought this year. And then I suppose picking up the issue around building on countryside areas, we have been securing net biodiversity gain in areas where houses have been built in the past couple of years or so. So I don't believe that's too much of an issue to be concerned around, because that's an active policy that we apply and will be exploring further through the local plan updates.
So in terms of the sort of change, if you like, in terms of working arrangements for staff, so yeah, very much like a lot of employers, the borough councils adopted the sort of hybrid working arrangements for staff, whereby they spend roughly 3 days a week in the office and 2 days working from home on average. Not in all roles, but that's the general sort of pattern. Clearly part of that is making sure that staff have the right setup at home. So, we do carry out assessments, and the staff who have to carry out their own assessment to make sure that they have the necessary sort of workspace and environment at home to work from home smoothly and efficiently. And I've got to say, the feedback we've had from staff has been really, really positive, both in terms of the way the office is now set out to facilitate hot desking, but also in terms of the sort of the balance in terms of the home versus office working week, if you like. Again, there's been lots of praise from staff that have really embraced that way of working, and clearly it has a beneficial impact in terms of reducing emissions in terms of all staff travelling in every day. So, yeah, it is something we're monitoring. It's not that we're forcing staff to work from home against their will. We clearly have adopted it in a very sensible approach and make sure that we are looking after our staff.
Thank you, Tom. I just want to say thank you for that. I think it's very easy for residents perhaps to see the councillors as the front face of the council, but it's actually the officers who are the engine room of how this council operates, and quite frankly how services are provided to our residents. So absolutely, you're at the forefront of our thoughts, and thank you for that comment. Next speaker then is Miranda Chubb.
Thank you. Thank you. Within Basingstoke, as you know, we generate 1 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent per year, and the largest sources of greenhouse gases in our housing are transport and the goods and services we buy. We still rely on gas and oil to heat our homes. Our public transport still burns fossil fuels, and our grid electricity is also still mostly generated by fossil fuels. So we do have a long way to go to get to net zero. And to do this by 2030 in Basingstoke requires a reduction of emissions of around 160,000 tonnes of each year for the next 8 years. The strategy update does not currently include clear, comprehensive and accurate data on borough-wide progress to date, and there is no clear trajectory on how this strategy will deliver the required reductions to get to net zero by 2030. As you know, renewable energy is needed to power local demand, and it's also a good source of financial return, wind and solar being the cheapest sources of power in the UK. It's an aim in the Basingstoke Horizon 2050 vision for the borough to generate the energy it uses. However, this strategy doesn't appear to have a plan for delivering the required renewable energy generation and the local improved electric grid infrastructure that it will need. There also doesn't appear to be a plan to decarbonise the Chinham incinerator. It also doesn't include solid plans to ensure that existing buildings will be insulated and retrofitted in time, and that any new buildings are built to net zero passive house standards, which is key to getting to net zero. It also doesn't seem to ensure the protection of our natural environment. Sorry?
Half a minute.
Oh, sorry, thanks. We continue to lose green space to housing and commercial developments rather than securing nature recovery networks and improving and increasing green spaces to maximise biodiversity. It doesn't include a plan to reverse the decline in species abundance. Clear pathways to delivering these key elements need to be included within the strategy. Most importantly, it also needs to demonstrate that it will deliver the drastic reduction in carbon emissions that were needed to get us to net zero by 2030. Sorry?
Please draw to a close, 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, thank you. And I ask that these items are included as a matter of urgency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Again, I'll pass over
Thank
to
you,
Councillor
Chair.
Leitch's.
Yeah, thank you for that, Miranda. Really helpful. Just going through your list, and I won't pick up everything, but all those things that you have listed, I can assure you are things that we are dealing with, that we have policies for, and if it doesn't come across clearly enough in the strategy, then maybe we need to look at that, but I can discuss, but all of those things, I mean, I'm absolutely not against wind and solar, and I see the benefits of that, and having just got back from a trip from Ireland, and I can see all the wind farms everywhere, I get the benefits. So officers, there is a lot of work going on in the background in relation to that, and which will feed into the local plan and all those things, and I think it would be helpful, and I was actually speaking to officers today, because we've got the meeting with you on Monday, as I think it would be great to get you in as the chair of Green and Basingstoke maybe in the new year, just to go through all those things with you and have a proper meeting around those policies and stuff. But just to assure you here that everything you have listed is absolutely on the radar and work is being done in respect of all of them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll move on to the next public speaker now. The next public speaker is Martin Heath. So Martin, you'll have 2 minutes when you start talking, and my colleague will give you a 30-second end of time warning. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, this is a good plan. It's a plan that would deliver hundreds, maybe thousands of tonnes of carbon savings. We see an example of the LAD scheme, 40 tonnes saving, hydrogenated vegetable oil, 10 tonnes saving, toolkits, maybe another 100 tonnes. The council itself saving 1,400 tonnes over 4 years, all very laudable. But this is not a strategy. It's not a strategy that would deliver carbon zero by 2030. And just to remind ourselves, that would require a cut of 1 million tonnes, not 1,000 tonnes, not 10,000 tonnes, but 1 million tonnes. What we have before us today, really, is a plan. It's a series of tactical interventions. It's an unconnected series of small-scale actions that will reduce our emissions by a few thousand tonnes, and even that over quite a few number of years. And again, to put that into context, we need to cut 1 million tonnes. And those sort of mathematically minded people in the room would realise that 1,000 tonnes is just 1,000th of 1 million tonnes. So we're only getting to about 1,000th of what we really need to do. And I think to sort of misquote that famous quote in Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat. This one is not big enough. We need an overarching strategy that cuts across all what the council does. Where in the current plan does it talk about stopping building inefficient homes and offices? Where does it talk about retrofitting the hundreds of the 80,000 homes we already have?
Half a minute.
Where's the investment in walking, rewilding, stopping spurious claims about offsetting? It doesn't work. Where does it say we're going to invest in public transport? And there's no strategic thinking really going on. On one hand, we're building 17,000 new homes. We're building a battery on Basing Fen, one of the biggest carbon sinks in the whole town. We've got a planning committee that will build new houses on golf courses.
Please draw to a close.
Another planning committee that will turn down solar farms. Where's the strategic thinking? We need a plan and a strategy to deliver net zero by 2030. The current plan is not a strategy. It gets us maybe 100th of the way there. It's maybe 1,000th of the way there.
Thank you, Mr. Heath.
And,
your 2 minutes is
yeah, and as I
long
was
over.
saying,
Thank you.
what we need is a strategy, not a plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heath, for your words there. Councillor Leitch, do you want to pick this up? Mark, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably worth saying from the outset that our target is to be net zero by 2030, and we recognise that there are other authorities such as Hampshire and the government's own targets of 2050, so we're working in a context where we're being much more ambitious than others, but we have to recognise that our influence in that sense is relatively limited. That's why the plans is focused on enabling and inspiring residents to take action themselves. We do recognise that we have a number of other strategies that sit underneath the climate change work. We've got an emerging local plan update that will be published next year that will set the scene for new development and the standards to be achieved. That's based upon detailed evidence base that seeks to achieve the targets in the climate declaration, emergency declaration. We've got a transport strategy that's been adopted with Hampshire County Council that sets the scene for more detailed work around improvements to public transport, walking and cycling. So I can offer some assurance that there are strategies in place to work towards this target, but as I say, we are inevitably influenced by what the government priorities are and what their investment plans are. So I think we have to kind of consider our target within that context.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Thank you very much. And then wrapping up, our last public speaker of the day is Rowan Harding. Rowan, again, you have 2 minutes when you start talking, and my colleague will remind you when you have 30 seconds left. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I've just got some probably key questions that relate to nature, which is an area I'm very passionate about. So in terms of the borough, this is very specific. Maintenance, why are the teams who do the maintenance not trained in making sure that they're enhancing, developing and creating areas of biodiversity in the borough? It seems to be very, very slow, and yet that could be a really quick win. Why is the resource done and I suppose shared in such an awful way that it is detrimental to biodiversity? Why is the definition for green corridors not set out in the plan and the strategy, or not strategy, the plan from the council? Why are we waiting for central government to provide legislation in terms of what should be done around biodiversity in the borough? We need to actually be leading the way and pushing ahead and doing more. Why do we not have some form of impact officer within the borough so that decisions are not just done based on financials, they are actually done based on impact? And why are we not making more of the new ranger team within the borough to make sure that they are encouraging and inspiring more residents to get involved with biodiversity, not just on the council green areas, but actually in residents' homes and gardens? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rowan. I've tried to take note of all those questions. If I'll pass over to Councillor Richardson and Mark to answer them. If you don't feel any of them have been answered, if we've missed any of them, by all means, please do feel free to email in and I can pass them on and make sure they get answered.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I think it's this is just the climate emergency declaration, and this strategy is just the top document. We have, as a council, so many other strategies, etc., like the local plan and everything. I was saying to Miranda that we've got other things going on. This isn't, we can't give everything here. This is just saying that we're doing all this work. With biodiversity, we've got a whole biodiversity team. We've got a plan to have a biz in every ward. And in fact, we have lots of biodiversity in many wards. We've been working with officers looking at that and what we do. We've got the green infrastructure strategy. We've got the ecological emergency, which deals, and there's a paper on that deals with everything. And it's also, we absolutely don't just make decisions on the financials when it comes to biodiversity. That's absolutely not the case. And officers take into account the impact of green, etc. The ranger team are working extremely hard, especially with all the volunteer groups, and have lots of different areas of open space where there's management plans on, where they work themselves with our operations team, but also with volunteer groups. So all that work is ongoing, and there is all those strategies in place. And we have a biodiversity team and rangers that do all of that work. And in the budget, again, there is requests for further people to work with the rangers to continue to do that work and continue to have more biodiversity improvement zones, etc.
Yeah, just really to add to the point that Councillor Reach has made, really, that as part of the ordinary policy process and all the reports that now come through for cabinet members to make decisions on or cabinet, they take into account the climate and the ecological implications. So a key part of those decision-making process has got to reflect on what the actual implications are and how that will be mitigated. So just aligned to that. Again, I sort of look after the Rangers team indirectly, and again, as Councillor Reaches has already mentioned, it is a fairly new team that's been set up, but it's an incredible resource. I know it's had a lot of success in its first year, and as Councillor Reaches has already mentioned, there's plans to sort of strengthen that moving forwards.
Thank you very much for that. And I wanted to thank all the public speakers for coming in and addressing the committee. I propose to move on now to councillors for questions around the paper. What I suggest doing is breaking the paper down around the 5 main headings in the paper and going through section by section, where we can then address questions for that section at the time. I believe Mark is also accompanied by Sam Taylor to help answer any questions as well. So what I'll do then is I'll move on to section 3 of the paper, which is the council's operational emissions. Have we got any questions on section 3? Councillor Morrow.
Can I do a quick clarification of one of the questions that was asked by the speakers? Yeah. So a little explanation of offsetting. Is there any case where we offset emissions out of the borough? Because I think the question was whether we could be offsetting somewhere outside the borough that does have drought problems, and I didn't know if that was answered or not.
Yeah, I could pick that up, and I guess the decision has been very recent. So the kind of schemes we're looking at are we're still investigating a number. Yes, the simple answer, they are UK based is the priority. In terms of the standards that exist, the kind of verified standards, the predominant one in the UK is called the Woodland Carbon Code. There are no verified schemes under that scheme, that code in the borough, and actually not in the southeast of England at the moment. But part of the scheme, as part of the verification, they take into account a number of risk factors, drought being one, fire, all the other things. So, and the credits are only verified kind of every 5 to 10 years. People go verify and make sure the woodland is as expected, its growth has been as expected. So if it was affected by something like drought, less credits would be available is the way it works. So so any offsetting is done with a kind of verified, proven carbon sequestration, carbon absorption. That helps clarify.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I'm just thinking ahead to when we get to 2025 and we have to see whether we've met our target or not. And I'd really like to hear that the equation at that time will not include any offsetting by purchasing credits.
We've been looking at a sort of pathway and the steps we need to take to reach net zero, and the way that we've predicated that is not based upon buying offsets. It's upon achieving that by eliminating our emissions at source or through natural absorption through our green assets locally.
Thank you. Councillor Lee. And then Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. So I actually also want to just follow up on one of the questions that was asked, kind of an obscure point on it. So a lot of staff are now on a work from home schedule. Obviously, we've reduced emissions by cars not coming in to the offices. We've downsized. Are we counting any emissions that they create during the working hours at home as part of the council's emissions that we emit?
I go quickly. So they haven't been included historically in this year, but we've done some calculations now to make it kind of assumptions based on, as you say, working hours, times at home, average kit. As part of some surveys, we've asked a few more questions to clarify that. So certainly there's appetite to include that moving forward. as a kind of indication, it was broadly of an order of about 30 tonnes. When you think about the kind of total carbon footprint being 730, so kind of that gives you an order of magnitude. I guess what we haven't historically recorded, and therefore haven't also recorded the reduction in, is the commuting emissions. So again, there'll be, as part of the travel plan, we now have a bit more data that we could again kind of compare the increase in working from home emissions compared to that reduction in commuting emissions.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Okay, could I go back to offsetting? Welcome Councillor Aegis's statement about offsetting. And in relation to the 2025 position, shouldn't we ensure in the documentation, if it's not covered already, that that is the clear approach to offsetting that the council is adopting? So we have a clear statement in there that this is a temporary coverage, it's not the permanent solution. That's the approach that we're going to adopt.
I think that's something that's set out in the Cabinet decision of October, where we will offset it until such time as we're able to eliminate. And it's also reflected in the action plan that sits behind the strategy.
Okay, if you could just dig out that document and let me see it, that would be absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions on section 3 of the paper? Councillor Tuck.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank all our speakers. I think I want to take them home with me this evening. And I've got a couple of follow-ups from what they've been asking, which is peatland and fen and bog. We do have those in our borough. We have Basing Fen, we have Blacklands, calcareous peat bog, we have bog and wetlands that hampered Cromwell's forces advancing on Basing House, but these have long since dried out from over-abstraction, and certainly the fen, I hope, is still intact, but other areas are struggling. We could look at what we can do to enhance those habitats. The map, Ms Chubb mentioned the map to achieve net zero, and I do feel, for me, and it's probably just a me, that although you've put in your chart at the back the reduction in carbon that you think will come from these things, I'd like to see that as a map of a target. Like, I want to see the plan in view of, here we are, this is what we've done, and this is how we're getting to net zero. And I get that there will be different things in your project plan, but actually at the minute, it's not easy for me to see actually how we're achieving that. I was also concerned that Martin was mentioning very different figures to the ones I was reading here, unless I've misunderstood something. And I don't know whether he was talking about the emissions from absolutely everywhere and everything, or what, but I had the impression I was talking about two different worlds. And I would like to just understand why his figures were seemingly so different to the ones that we're looking at. And then Ms Harding's comments about the biodiversity areas and stuff, I completely agree. I think we've got some really quick wins in the way that we manage our environment, and even just council-owned land that I was looking at the map today. It's not a huge amount of space, but actually those verges and all the rest of it are really, really important. And I'm sure I should be discussing this in section 4 or something different, Chair, so I'm sorry if I've got this in the wrong order. But I was looking at Natural England's research report today on carbon storage and sequestration by habitat, a review of the evidence. That was published in 2021. And if I may just have your indulgence to read a paragraph from the summary of that. The natural environment can play a vital role in tackling the climate crisis as healthy ecosystems take up and store a significant amount of carbon in soils, sediments and vegetation. Alongside many other negative impacts, the destruction and degradation of natural habitats has resulted in the direct loss of carbon stored within them. Restoring natural systems can start to reverse this damage at the same time as supporting and enhancing biodiversity, alongside delivering co-benefits for climate change adaptation, soil health, water management and society. This Natural England Research Report is designed to clearly set out the evidence of how restoration and good management of habitats can contribute to climate change mitigation. And it's my feeling, I am a fresher, I'm a novice, I do not know all the papers and everything going on within this borough, but I really feel it's disjointed still. I accept we've got a section on the natural environment within this paper, but we are not viewing this in a holistic way, which is where we will get the benefits. And I also would like to pick up on our speakers where I was saying there are some easy things we can do regarding the natural environment. This paper also says we have to be realistic. I think it was Councillor McCormick in another meeting that mentioned, you know, we'd have to plant millions of trees to affect me putting the kettle on in the morning. And it is that. You know, we have to be realistic. It's not possible to offset anything close to current UK emissions across the different sectors through better environmental management alone. You know, the difference is huge, but it's a quick win. It's an easy win, and it's something, frankly, we can all do, whether it's planting that hedgerow instead of your fence or whatever it is. There are lots of things we as individuals can do, which I know you cover in your action by all, but there are things that we need to lead at the borough as well. And now I've totally lost the thread as to what my question was, but thank you.
I'm sure there was a question in there, Councillor Tuck, but it was very eloquently put. Thank you very much. I'll pass over now.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Councillor Tuck. I'll pick up a few of the questions and Sam will pick up some answers to some of the other points, if that's okay. Just in terms of that pathway to reaching net zero, I think that reflects some of the conversations we've been having in the office and being more transparent about that, and that's something that we have on our kind of to-do list. We'd like to clearly set out what we've achieved by project and where we aim to get to, so that there is that kind of transparency for residents to understand what we're doing and the progress we're making. So that's something that's in hand. Just picking up on some of the points you made finally there, I think it's worth reflecting on the view that we are proposing a new green team, and the idea is that they would work with residents to not only look at energy use, carbon saving, but also improvements they can make, that residents could make in terms of their own kind of gardens and natural environments locally. So I think that kind of responds to some of the points you made there. As a general point, as a climate change team, we work with lots of colleagues across the council in terms of our property colleagues, our natural environment team. And while Sam and I are here this evening, we perhaps haven't always got the full detail and are reliant on working with others to address some of the points you've made there. But certainly some of the points you've covered are touched on in the report. And Sam's going to just talk briefly about the carbon sequestration work we've recently commissioned.
Yeah, I think part of the answer is to agree on some of your points that actually there are so many co-benefits, and tackling carbon emissions in isolation versus tackling biodiversity improvement in isolation and all these things. That's not what we're seeking to do at all, and I hope that you feel reassured that as teams we are increasingly collaborating on all these things. As Mark said, we have an office delivery group that brings all these things together. We all sit under councillor each as a portfolio holder to have that joined up approach, and ticking off all those things at once actually is much easier. A particular example is a study that we've commissioned with the natural environment team on carbon sequestration. And again, it's because I think if you look at things from a carbon point of view narrowly, then that actually might not have very good biodiversity impacts. Tree planting is an oft-cited way to improve, absorb carbon, and it's good at that. But if you do that badly, it's really bad for biodiversity. So a huge part of that study is ensuring that we have the best overall impact. There are lots of quick wins. There are lots of challenging things. It's not always a quick win. Actually some of these nature projects from a kind of climate change point of view actually take a long time for their benefits to be realised. Again, without going over old ground, sometimes we're offsetting has a role to play, kind of more immediate. But yeah, it's certainly want to say that we're working alongside them to ensure that we are kind of maximising all those co-benefits. And it's not just around the natural environment. There are things like active travel, the kind of reduced transport that obviously has health benefits, all these kind of things. And we're really seeking to draw that out more in what we do moving forward as well. And I think you talked about numbers as well, and I guess we're kind of jumping ahead to section 4. But that table there does set out, I guess it's to flag that they are in kilotons, so that value in the in kind of below 4.5, it talks about the table of greenhouse gas emissions. There's just under 1 million. There are a few sources of information. We use the government published figures as the kind of most replicable, and they break that down by local authority. That makes it replicable across what we're doing each year. You can see the 928.6. So just shy of 1 million is the figure that we've got there around total greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you very much. It's almost a very nice segue into section 4, unless anybody has any more questions in section 3. Councillor Morrow, go on. You can ruin my segue. Please go on.
Very quick. More of an observation on the table. One of the things that helps us meet this 2/3 seems to be that we've changed energy supplies to, a renewable source, which I don't know if everyone sort of picked that up. Without that, it's not such a win on the emissions front. That's more of an observation. So we actually maybe haven't cut our emissions quite as much over that period as it seems. I don't know if you agree with that.
I think we recognise it was a fairly quick win in the sense of moving from one supplier and one source of energy to another. So that is in fact correct. Yes.
It's still positive.
Yeah.
It's not reduction.
Definitely. Yeah.
So it's positive, but we haven't actually cut our usage or the emission. The usage hasn't really gone down a lot, but we're getting it from a source.
It would have gone down because we've gone from 2 buildings to 1.
Yeah, I guess it's fair to say that in a way it's a kind of investment in the overall grid is decarbonising anyway, and we're almost kind of proactively buying renewable energy ahead of that wider grid decarbonisation. And there's also financial reasons why we're looking to reduce energy consumption as well as the carbon impact. But yeah, it was a kind of quick proactive step we could take to make a significant impact.
Thank you. Just my comment to that. I mean, I'll take any quick win that we can get to reduce our numbers. But yeah, anybody else? Section 3. Can we move on to section 4? Going once, going twice. Okay, so we'll move on to section 4 of the paper. Borough-wide emissions from residents, business, etc. Have I got any questions on section 4? Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the housing association properties. I note that there's been a meeting and that we're working with Sovereign and Vivid. When are we going to have a clear plan? Because that's a heck of a job to bring all of their properties up to good standards in terms of insulation, and also to make the most of opportunities for, I don't know, solar panels, whatever else we could use. So what have we got that we can sort of hold on to and hold them to account on?
I think in terms of both of the large associations, they are developing their plans. And they're carrying out, I suppose, background work and research to understand which properties need the most attention, so that they can start to develop that capital programme to deliver the change that we need. So we could happily send to you the slides that they presented at the MAP back in October to give you a bit of a sense of where they're heading. And I think we expect more things to emerge from that. But rest assured, they are doing a lot of work in that respect.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions on section 4? Oh yeah, Councillor Mackay has a question.
Yeah, I was thinking about public transport in the borough, which is, buses in particular have been under pressure for a number of years, and the rather alarming news this week from Hampshire County Council regarding their finances. I just wonder if the council is going to make any contingency plans to protect public transport in the borough because of the contribution it can make to the green agenda.
I think it's probably worth bearing in mind that we don't fully understand how county will aim to make savings in the future. So until we have that understanding, it's probably a little early to be making decisions and formulating views around how we might support that. But clearly we do contribute a significant sum already to supporting public transport in the borough to benefit residents.
I recognise all of that, and that's why I chose the word contingency, just to sow the seeds that we may have to think a little bit more as to what might be coming along. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question from the chair, really, which was it was interesting. I read in the papers today that the French Senate has just passed legislation that any car park that has more than 80 lots has to put solar panels in above it. And I guess my technical naivety is this something that would work over here? How much of an impact would it have on the council to look to introduce something like that? Thank you.
I suppose we are having some conversations around developing an EV strategy to guide how we roll out EV chargers more generally in the borough. Obviously, we're focused on our car parks and the assets that we control because we're not the highway authority, and we are reliant on Hampshire in that respect. Aligned to that, we're also developing a parking strategy to outline how our town centre car parks will be used in the future. And that was recently subject to consultation, and within that we outline an approach that seeks to roll out chargers more proactively in our assets. So that mirrors that approach. We haven't outlined a particular number or proportion of spaces that should be EV kind of focused, but that's something we could potentially put our minds to.
Yeah, sorry, just a follow-up. It wasn't the EV chargers. It was solar panels. They were roofing over the car park almost with solar panels above it, making the spaces.
Certainly, we've looked at other authorities that have done that to see what the costs and benefits are. We haven't explored it in too much details yet, but I think it's something we could explore in the future potentially once we understand how our car parks will kind of evolve over time.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question on section 4? Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. I just want to ask about community centres. I note that you've got a plan for reducing energy consumption. Have you also got a plan for helping them to make the most of opportunities for solar panels, other ways of, you know what I mean?
I think at the moment there are a few options that an opportunity that we're providing to community centres. We touched on later the low carbon across the south east scheme, or low case as it's abbreviated, that provides some match funded grant opportunities that we have shared via our connected community teams to community centre operators. There's a wider community building strategy kind of work going on in the background as well, and kind of, I guess, other internal discussions, again, how we can support them. I think there's that question of they don't always know what to do or how to do it. So at the moment we're pushing the low case grant, whilst we think about how else we can handhold, I guess, to support operators.
Councillor Williams.
Could I ask in that context that you copy the paperwork to the sports charity Overton Recreation Centre that runs 3 community halls within Overton and wouldn't necessarily qualify. Perhaps you can also clarify for me. I saw before I became a councillor a paper that was about strengthening the resilience of communities. I saw it as a draft from BVA. I commented then. I've not seen it come up within council business, so I'd like to know where that paper sits, if you can answer that for me. Because one of the key thrusts of that paper was about devolving responsibility for council community-owned halls to voluntary groups, and that would be particularly relevant in terms of then any costs that they would have to incur for saving their expenditure on energy.
I think that's probably one we need to take away, speak to colleagues around and get back to you if that's okay. Oh, sorry.
Just might save me coming back. So I think what you're mentioning is the strengthening community strategy. Yes. That's obviously, yeah, so that went to CP back in March for your comments and views. That then went to Cabinet and was adopted in July. So the final strategy, it has been adopted and signed off, yeah, absolutely. I think we definitely reflected on lots of the comments that were made by CP at the time about the narrative in terms of concern around a direction of travel, which appeared to be us trying to hand a lot of buildings over to community organisations. That was not the aim at all. It was more an enabling approach, that where communities sought that opportunity, that we weren't deaf to it, that we had a policy position on it, and we could consider those sorts of requests if that came about. So very much reflected on the comments that came from CP at the time. Hopefully the new strategy obviously reflects positively on those comments that were made, but obviously more than happy to circulate it after today's meeting.
Thank you. Anybody else on section 4? No? Okay. We'll move on to section 5 of the paper then, which is air quality. Anybody have any questions on section 5? No? Okay then. So if we move on to section 7 of the paper, which is achievements in 2021, 2022. Do we have any questions on section 7?
Section 6.
Section 6. To do with progress. Yep, sorry. Section 6 then, do we have any questions on the progress? There we go. Councillor Tuck.
Yes, please. External partnership working. Can you just give me a sort of outline of I know there are a number of community groups involved in conservation and environmental work in their local patch, and I wondered if you could outline for me how those relationships are coming together, please.
Sorry, what did you ask?
Section 6.5, external partnership working is of paramount importance. And I was just asking about, obviously there are a number of community groups. I think we've probably had some speaking this evening, and you get involved on environmental issues and the like. And I was wondering how that engagement is working and how we're succeeding there.
I guess from our point of view, we focus mainly on the kind of climate change focused, and there is a separate team, the natural environment team, that is more engaged with the nature conservation groups. I have got some stats around the kind of hours of voluntary hours that have been donated effectively by volunteers in the borough in terms of nature conservation. So we've got that kind of information, but from our perspective, we tend to work with colleagues from Greener Basingstoke. We have the Low Carbon Energy Forum, and we are...
Officers, what's that? Alison, all the officers.
Oh yeah, sorry. We regularly work with the neighbour plan groups and the parish councils within the borough in respect of climate change. So we kind of tap into the community groups that are coming together to tackle climate change. We bring them together to share best practice, and we've recently been undertaking some kind of questionnaire to understand what kind of support they need going forward. So that's probably where we focus our efforts. But I say that the natural environment team are a bit more engaged with the conservation type groups.
Thank you. Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. Just building on the partnership theme, how are we working with farmers and what have we achieved through partnering with them?
I think that's an area where, well, from the climate change point of view, we've tried to engage with the National Farmers Union to secure some further conversations around how we can assist. But I think there's also some conversations in terms of the natural environment team and working in that respect. So I think it's uncharted territory. I think there's more we could potentially do. But so far we're just perhaps testing the water in that respect.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? It would be great if you could really push that, because certainly looking around where we live, there used to be an awful lot more conservation work done on farmland than there is now, and it's definitely getting worse. So the more you could do, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a shame really what's happened in national politics. We had 45-day window of where we had perfect access into DEFRA, I think, but less said of that the better. Any more questions then on section 6? Councillor Morrill.
On the same sort of subject, do we have people that work with wildlife corridors? Have we mapped wildlife corridors? Is there any protection for them?
I mean, that should be already set out in our green infrastructure strategy in terms of, particularly on the nature recovery networks. Again, there's a lot of work going on currently around how that will be rolled out nationally, and we are in discussions with Hampshire County Council to work with them in terms of how that will be delivered locally. So yeah, it is certainly on our radar.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's when we're setting out the work programme, we do mention bringing the green infrastructure strategy back to CAP anyway, so we can cover that. So we'll cover that in more detail in this committee. Do we have any more questions on section 6? Is everybody happy for me to move on to section 7? Section 7 then, achievements last year, 21-22. Any questions on section 7? It covers Appendix 1 as well. Councillor Mamalani?
Thank you, Chair. This is about 7.30. A few months ago, there was a survey about EV charging points, and we identified around 30 charging points to be installed across the borough, and that is not been mentioned in 7.30. So are we still on plan to deliver them, or are we not?
We're really keen that this happens. It's something that we're pushing Hampshire County Council on, because they, as a highway authority, just for other members' benefits, this is the rollout of chargers for on-street locations for those residents that don't benefit from private driveways, so the likes of Victorian terraces in the town centre and the like. We're pushing hard for Hampshire County Council to submit the funding bid to the government to make that happen. We've undertaken surveys of the locations where they could potentially be installed, and I think that's where we're kind of nudging Hampshire to make that submission so that we can commence that work. But there is a programme that's worked up, so once funding is secured from the government to supplement that we're putting in, that should happen.
Yeah, it would be nice if we mentioned the same thing on the paper, saying, we are working with Hampshire County Council to secure some funding from central government to do this also.
Just to come back, Chair, that's referred to a little later in the report as a kind of future work area, because I think it's something we're still progressing. It's referred to under 8.1.2, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tuck.
Oh, hi. I'm looking at 7.7, the residential grant schemes. I could see that you'd had various schemes with various numbers of applications and so on. And I'm guessing that some of this is for loft insulation as well as heat pumps and PV panels. How successful have we really been? Because I'm really concerned that we've got some ageing housing stock that's not of the best construction, and that at least some decent loft insulation would help everybody this winter. Is there anything we can do to sort of fast track that or engage people? I realise it's their home and their choice.
I mean, that's a really good point you raised at the end, is people don't always want free money. So I guess the one challenge with the grant schemes at the moment is they are only accessible for a certain portion of people. So they're on kind of low income households, so an income threshold, and inefficient households, so those that are the least efficient at the moment. It makes a lot of sense to target those first. That obviously does leave a huge swathe of people who aren't able to access that grant funding. We have a small kind of loans and grants available to council directly as well, but again the criteria are similar. I mean, the schemes have been successful relatively. So when we're part of a wider consortium, and there's been a really good uptake relative in the area of Basingstoke and Dean compared to some of our peers. This was the first iteration of the scheme. We're now in the next wave that has a slightly wider pool. It's slightly larger funding pots for certain people, and we're really continuing to push that. A bunch of letters have just gone out in the last week, with another wave going out again in the next week or so to potentially eligible homes. So we're really trying to push it. I guess the kind of counter is, the more you guys can push it as councillors as well. If there are people we've been attending events as well as a team, targeting areas where there might be more eligible people. So we've gone to things like a couple of food banks and that kind of idea to really push it as best we can, particularly given the energy crisis. But there's always going to be a challenge to reach everyone who might be eligible and reach the right people and make sure uptake is as good as it could be. I guess that's a really good point. So one of the aspirations is with the future green team that we mentioned earlier, which is subject to that budget proposal, is they can be that on the ground presence more so than we can be at the moment, and strike up those links with community organisations, community centres, directly with residents, and we're kind of scoping out really how that team could work effectively with existing support like BVA, like Citizens Advice and others to really make sure. So we're having conversations with those organisations at the moment around how do we complement each other rather than duplicate. Let's not reinvent the wheel, and let's support you with what you're doing rather than duplicate what we're doing. So we really hope that team will boost the next round of this funding, which has been announced. There's going to be a future iteration launching in April next year.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm probably going to jump back and forth because I'm trying to link it up with stuff that's in the back within the report itself. So on the local plan update, I'm just trying to understand whether there are any mechanisms. It talks about many down and the adoption of high standards for delivery of housing there. Are there any mechanisms within the local plan itself that we can take that will ensure that the houses and the buildings that are built on that land achieve minimum, at the bare minimum, the minimum standards? Because what my worry is if we're just encouraging them to adopt the best practices, we could end up with them going off one way and us believing that we should be going in a different path. So how can we ensure that many down is delivered to the highest standards, preferably, but if not, at least the bare minimum? My second question relates to 7.45. It talks about carbon offsetting, and there's a number that I'll just read the last sentence. This amounts to 2,967 tonnes of carbon being offset. What percentage of the total is that's been offset? If you have that to hand. If not, I'm happy to take it in reply. Thank you.
Do you mean in terms of proportion of that value is all our emissions, all our measured emissions as a council since our baseline year, since the declaration. So this was the decision the cabinet made to offset our historic emissions up till the latest round being 21-22. So that's 3 years worth. It was 18, 19, 19, 20, and 2021, I think, or no, 1 year later than that.
Sorry, can I just clarify that? So we've decided to just offset it rather than the actions, or that was just some of the remaining bits?
So I guess so the actions we've outlined are what we've been doing to reduce emissions, but those emissions have already happened. So the decision was to account for that, to take responsibility, I guess was the terminology. So those historic emissions since the declaration have been offset, as opposed to that being anything forward-looking at this stage.
Okay, thank you. It says that the best practice principles are being followed. What do we know what those are? As in, what have we actually done in terms of offsetting? Have we paid money to credit somewhere? Have we planted trees somewhere else? What was it that we've done to actually offset that?
Sure, and it might be useful to be wrapped up. I think someone asked for the cabinet report to be circulated, so maybe that's useful for the committee to see as well. Essentially, the emerging best practice is that to be net zero aligned in offsetting. So is that schemes should actively remove carbon from the atmosphere rather than reducing future emissions, and nature-based, bringing the most, I guess technological solutions might exist in the future, but there's nothing at the moment. So looking at nature-based solutions, and that's the kind of, I alluded to the woodland carbon code earlier. So although the decision has been made, we haven't actually invested yet. So that's something that we as officers are looking at, the most appropriate schemes, the most kind of robust schemes we can find.
Can I just come back, Chair? So technically we haven't actually offset anything. We've got a plan.
The decision was made. The decision's just been made, and officers have been working really hard to get that. You can't just make a decision and the next day it happens. So it's imminent, but the decision was only made, a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Sam, can I just get the note of that paper you're going to circulate again? I'm just capturing actions.
Yeah, of course, it'll be the cabinet report on offsetting that sets out the decision.
Thanks. Yeah, sure. And I think there was a question on Manydown as well, I think.
Yeah.
So the Manydown planning application was determined under the existing adopted local plan, which has got one set of kind of policies. We're obviously working on a new local plan update that we envisage being published next autumn time. Obviously, when homes are built, they'll need to be in accordance with the latest building regulation standards, and they're ramping up over time in line with the government's proposals to be net zero as well. So they'll be kind of judged against those building control standards at that point in time. The local plan update will give us the opportunity to explore whether we can move faster than those, I suppose, within the confines of national planning framework. So we aspire to be net zero in terms of our local plan policies, but they'll be explored with members next year as we progress towards publication of the local plan in the autumn 2023.
Thank you. I've got a question on section 7, which is about the LC whip, so the cycling and walking plan. I got very supportive of the plan that came out, and a lot of my residents were very supportive in it as well. Living in a part of the rural area of my ward, and I'm sure other rural wards are similar. You take your life in your hands really when you try and navigate some of our roads. So anything I think that can separate that pedestrian, cycle, road traffic will be fantastic. However, I've just seen the leader of Hampshire County Council go in and raise concerns about the finances at Hampshire County Council. So I guess my question is, how achievable do we think everything is in that LC whip, and is there a chance that there must probably be some financial decisions taken on some of those recommendations?
I suppose in terms of implementing any transport scheme, it's often necessary to rely on Section 106 contributions from development and or government funding directly. So when Hampshire make a funding bid to the government for a particular scheme, that will be judged on its own merits. So I think it's fair to say that in terms of the LC whip routes, Hampshire will be looking for development contributions from sites coming forward in and around Basingstoke and the other settlements to fund some of those routes. And I suspect we'll also be looking towards the government to top those up. By way of example, proposals have been developed for a high quality link between Manydown and the town centre, going through Winklebury and past the leisure park. There's a pot of money that's been secured from Manydown North to fund that, but it's not sufficient. So Hampshire will be looking to the government to top that up through the active travel fund bids that they will be submitting. We put in a bid ourselves through the Levelling Up Fund in the summer to secure that funding. We're still awaiting the outcome of that. So I think that's the way that those kind of routes are progressed at the present time. And I suppose it's not too reliant on county and the bigger picture conversation that you mentioned earlier.
Fantastic, that's very positive. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Questions on section 7? Councillor Lee?
Sorry, Cheers. What I want to do is really follow up on that strategy, because I think it's great, and actually the proposal for Medidown to Basingstoke cycle route that goes through my ward is good. However, Hampshire County Council and Basingstoke Dean Council aren't aligned on what the provision should be. So Hampshire aren't willing to invest in the bridge upgrades that will get people across the dual carriageway. However, I know that speaking to officers that it's absolutely the best place to go and the safest route and the most logical route. How can we make sure that we're actually aligned on all of this? Because again, going back to the Medidown point, we've got people going off in different directions and not getting a good strategy at the end.
I think it's probably fair to say we certainly had a few conversations around what the best solution was, and whether it was a new bridge over the Ringway close to Milestones or an at-grade crossing the other side of closer to Milestones in effect. The levelling up funding bid that was submitted was an agreed position between us and Hampshire, and that was to replace the bridge, the existing footbridge, which, for those of you that know it, is quite narrow and it's quite high and perhaps a little bit intimidating if you're on a bike. So the proposal was to provide a wider deck so that you had space for cyclists and pedestrians. So we did come together in the end on that particular proposal and came to a shared view. Hopefully we'll be successful in securing funding to progress that.
Fantastic. Anybody else? Councillor Lee? No. So we're doing quite well with time. If nobody has any more questions on 7, I would like to move on to section 8. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we'll move on to section 8 of the paper, which is current area of focus. Any questions? Councillor Lee?
Yeah. In fact, no, it's not. It's question number 9. So you're safe. Sorry. I got it down.
Negligent discharge. Anybody else then? Section 8. Go on, Councillor Morrow.
I missed one at section 7. Sorry.
Oh, you want to go? You want to go back?
Can we go back?
Well, go on. I am new, right?
I did have a question.
I don't know how the rules work. So come on, let's go back to section 7.
I had a question for my ward. They were asking. It does cover in here mainly, but just to put it there, in Tadley we've got 2 charge points, electric charge points at the moment, but we are a town in our own right, and we would obviously like to have more, and also the sharing, because it's probably quite a good journey from Tadley to Basingstoke to share an electric vehicle. But from the paper I see that you're going to you've got a company looking into it, have you, a survey company, and is there any way we can apply for some? But yeah, but basically just to say that question for my resident and think of Tadley. Cheers.
Noted. I think part of the rollout that Councillor Mummalini referred to has some sites. I think there were 40 sites in total. I believe there were 1 or 2 in Tadley from memory. Apologies, I don't have the list in front of me, but that's certainly noted, and we're keen to support. I think it was a couple of sites, but let me get back to you once I have the certainty. Again, it's subject to Hampshire submitting that funding bid that I mentioned earlier, so there's a bit of uncertainty there still.
Just as an aside, so what we're doing in our ward, we're actually looking to claim some of our Section 106 contribution and build out some EV charger points in there as well. Now, I appreciate that Tadley doesn't get to build many houses, but I'm sure it's something we can look at. If there's no more on Section 7 or Section 8, then, Councillor Mackay, was that a hand up? So, no, okay. Is everybody happy that I move on to Section 9 then? Yes, Section 9, Councillor Lee, yeah.
Cheers, Chair. So it's on 9.7 about economic growth and job creation. I'm just wondering what efforts the council and you guys are taking to engage with maybe national employers. I know that over recent years we have seen a drop in kind of Motorola's gone, Tallies, quite sort of high-skilled, high-wage employers. So the engagement between national employers to bring them to Basingstoke so that we can use some of their knowledge our local people to grow our economy, but also to put some jobs into renewable energy, building wind turbines, or the technology that goes behind any of that. Is that something that you'll be keen to do or looking into?
Well, I guess a big thing that we're doing as a team is working with our colleagues in economic development to kind of start to facilitate those questions. We can ask them. I don't know if they're having those kind of conversations with those national companies. It's a really good idea. We can take it away. I think a lot of our conversations at the moment are really trying to understand, speaking to the kind of existing installers and the supply chain in those areas, and trying to convene those with demand and colleges and training providers, and start that kind of that conversation. You know, there's all a bit chicken and egg. You know, there needs to be the demand for the installers to invest in the right people to get trained up. I'm working with Hampshire County Council and their economic development and skills team to understand the broader picture, because obviously lots of employers can overlap that. But yeah, to the big national provider, I don't know, but we can have that question with colleagues.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up all the other sections as well, quite frankly, because there's hardly anything there anyway. So does anybody have any other questions on the paper before we go on to debate and comments? It's like the clock down clock ticking. Tick, tick, tick.
So I do. I don't think it's covered in the report, but it's certainly in the actions at the back, and one of them is about the ongoing work running the anti-idling campaign, and I still see some of the posters up at roundabouts. Do we know how much of an effect that has had on reducing borough-wide emissions? Because I drive in a hybrid car that has an automatic switch off when I get to traffic lights, but I can sit in traffic lights and see every single other car around me with their engine idling. How much of an impact has that campaign had, and were any fixed penalty notices issued?
I think it's quite difficult because we did it and then COVID hit, didn't it? But we still see it. It's still on our radar and we're still doing it. I get what you're saying about cars at traffic lights, and the ones that cut out when you're stationary are grey. I've got an electric car, so it's good. But I don't think the idling campaign can't stop that, so you couldn't enforce somebody to switch their engine off at traffic lights. It's more around like up at the train station, trying to encourage taxi drivers. And when we did launch the campaign, I spoke with quite a lot of the CPSOs and things who do encourage, and they are, you know, they do see the benefits of it, and they know it's still important. And I know the local MP was pushing it quite a bit, and you know, it's just trying to encourage people, especially taxi drivers at the station and things, to not idle. And then we were doing at one point, Tom, I think, weren't we, with Hampshire, campaigns outside of schools to stop parents idling when they're dropping their kids off. But yeah, it's a good point. It was a good process, and it probably slowed down a bit because of COVID. It's still on the radar, but it's certainly something I can pick up again with officers as to how we can try and push it.
Just chip in and say, yeah, I think there's been some recent successful campaigns, I guess, outside Queen Mary's and at Down Grange. I think where often it's reacting to particular complaints, and colleagues have been there. I think your question around fixed penalty notices. So I guess in a way that's a kind of last resort. So there have been none, mostly because actually the campaign has been successful or officers have been successful in requesting people to turn off engines. So if they've been approached, they've all turned off engines. Whereas I guess the fixed penalty notice is a kind of, if they don't when asked, it's a real kind of last resort. So there hasn't been a need to resort to that yet, which I guess is a good thing ultimately.
Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, just a quick comment on the idling thing. It's well known in health and safety management that poster campaigns have limited effect, but if you get the best from them, posters have to change regularly and be refreshed. So if we are thinking about posters being part of a campaign going forward for anti-idling, we should really think about the fact that you need to change posters. People stop seeing posters that are just there all the time. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I take that on board, and I think as part of, because obviously like Mark said at the beginning, this new website is going to be quite a big thing, so instead of just having all our climate change stuff buried in the back of our current website, it's just the Basingstoke and Dean one, it is going to be separate, and that's all got new branding, new graphics, and it's going, and I think if we, like you say, if we can start putting those new branding and graphics onto an anti-idling campaign, it'll probably be quite helpful.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Can I just I guess, just to carry it on a little bit, is that I get that you've had an effect by asking people to switch off, but that's like, I'll switch off here and I'll drive down to the next one and I'll leave it running. I guess how can we encourage people to change their behaviours more than actually just going, oh, I'll switch off here because he told me to, and then I'll drive down to the next traffic light and I'll leave it running and kind of two fingers up.
Yeah, and I get that, but I think a lot of people want you, it is just carrying on, isn't it? And if somebody, one person might be, it might then make them think, oh, actually, why are they doing that? Oh, it's because of climate change. And then each time, and then it's in their mind that they'll do it. There will always be people that whatever you do, even if you give them a fixed penalty notice, they probably won't listen. But no, I get where you're coming from, but I think it's just carrying that on and keeping on top of it and just making people realise that actually, you know, if it is up at places like train stations where taxi drivers are on a regular basis and the officers know that it's the same person all the time. But yeah, it's just keeping on at them, isn't it?
I think education through primary schools most probably help with that as well, because it's amazing what sticks in children's head. My daughter picked out that my speedometer wasn't working when I says I was doing 35 and a 30. That's a joke, by the way, before anybody thinks I was doing an Emily Thornberry. But I think, a serious note to that, absolutely. I think if a child sat in the back and saying, why is your engine still running, Daddy or Mummy?
Yeah, when we launched the campaign, we did it at a few schools, and you're right, because the kids then go home. It's like with recycling, when I go to these brownies and rainbows and things, then I get parents messaging me going, my kids come home and has emptied our recycling bin because they've taken out what should, but it's great, that's what children should do, so.
Fantastic. Anybody got any more questions then, or should we open it up to debate? Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. Just looking at 5.9 in the Appendix 1. Great about the refill and repair shops, etc. I'm just wondering whether there's more we can do on that, because with Basingstoke Service Centre closing down, which is a real shame, can we get more people involved in repairing and going to schools and link with BCOT and that sort of thing?
Well, I think it's a really interesting idea. I mean, I think so it's fair to say, obviously, with the last couple of years, COVID has meant things like Green Week and some of that in person or just engagement generally with some of these shops has been really hard. We had really good update, and I think two of the owners of some of these refill shops were members of the steering group for Green Week this year. So I think a lot of conversations are already happening now about how do we grow that. Would welcome ideas. I think that I guess that's, with lots of these things, would welcome ideas on how you think we could. I guess we're starting to have conversations with some of those operators. Yeah, whether going into schools and colleges could be a really interesting way. I guess it's also, as we've talked about, with all of this kind of stuff, it's the education piece, giving people information about the benefits, why it could be good, where they are, signposting to them, and again, as we talked about this new identity and the new website there, we'll be able to do that in another way, in another voice, kind of distinct to that corporate council channel. But yeah, would welcome any other thoughts on how we could.
Okay. Any other questions then, or I'm happy to open up to the floor for debate and comments that we can take back. One more question, Councillor Tuck? Yeah.
Hi, yes, this was 6.7 of the sort of action list. I haven't been hit between the eyes in terms of a robust, resilient, strict adaptation plan. And I know we've been looking at the town centre redevelopment in various committees. What have we been doing to ensure that robust resilience and strict adaptation plan is incorporated into all the redevelopment stuff that we've got going on, please? Town centre redevelopment in particular.
I suppose in terms of the town centre, the master plan is fairly high level. I think as we begin to deliver projects on the ground, that's when I think we'll begin to build these kind of elements into those particular schemes. I think there's a recognition in the higher level strategic document that you know, for example, more green infrastructure is needed in the town centre, more natural shading, those kind of things. So they recognise that at the higher level, and then we'll start to drill down with that resilience once, you know, individual projects are brought to fruition and designed up.
Okay, I'll look forward to that.
Just to follow up on that question myself then. So when would we expect to see that level of detail coming out from projects? So if the town strategy and the master plan is that high level overarching strategy, at what point do we get to see the detail coming in?
I think it's probably fair to say that when a particular site is delivered by the Borough Council through the town centre master plan, and consultation is taken forward on that site in more detail, you will begin to see elements of it within that. It's probably quite difficult for me to say because I'm not terribly involved in that particular project, but there will be a timeline for bringing forward the different elements developed with the project director for that piece of work.
It's maybe one for the committee. I know that the town strategy is going to cabinet anyway, but we may want to ask for it to come to committee anyway, so we can at least get an update and get that alignment from some of these key targets that we're trying to do, and ask those questions, I think, of those officers, and not put our officers on the spot for something they're not responsible for. So no, absolutely, thank you for that. Does anybody have any other questions then? Oh, yep, Councillor Gaskell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just an observation, really. It refers to working with partners for clean energy sort of uses and things. I was just thinking about the solar farm you talked about over car parks. I came across one this week where water companies are using waste heat from sewage and making heat for homes, local homes. We have an incinerator here, Veolia, produce a lot of heat. We're building next door to it. Do we talk to these people? Do we actually sort of engage with them and see if we can find schemes which they could help with and actually pay for? Thank you.
I think in the past there have been conversations with Hampshire County Council as landowner of the site adjacent to the incinerator, and a technical study was undertaken many years ago on that. I don't think we still have a copy of that, but that did explore the potential to tap into that heat arising from the incinerator. There are certain requirements that are needed to ensure they work. Residential schemes, I'm led to believe, don't tend to lend themselves terribly well to that kind of heat. I think there's quite a technical study behind it, but I understand you need a good mix of uses. You need kind of uses that demand that heat throughout the day. Homes typically require that heat at weekends and in the evenings when we're all home and using that energy. So you need the right type of development to really tap into that most effectively, I understand. But we do kind of explore those opportunities as they arise.
Just as a answer to that, so I come across these schemes quite a lot. Is there a facility to engage with the council or put them forward to the council if we have contacts who are interested in doing that type of thing and looking for an area to do it?
I think we're always happy to hear what learn from best practice from elsewhere. So by all means, put them in touch and we can see if there's any potential there.
Fantastic. Any other questions? No, if there's no other questions, then I'm going to open it up to debate and capture any comments if anybody has any comments. Does anybody want to start me off? Don't be shy, it's my first time. Councillor Lilly, I'll take that as a hand going up.
I think I'd like to say thank you for bringing this forward to the committee. That there's clearly a lot that we've got to do going forward, and hopefully you can take on board some of the comments and questions tonight so that we can amend it so that it does become more of a strategy rather than just a plan of actions going forward. And maybe an update come back here just if there is any revisions to it so that we can have a chance to debate it again.
what we typically do with the committee is to come back. We come to the committee 3 times per year, once with the annual update, and then twice later, every 4 months, effectively, to give you an update on how we're progressing with the action. So that's something we can pick up at the spring update, I guess it would be.
Fantastic. Anybody else? Anybody else like to add anything before I sum up? Okay, I'll sum up then. And I want to repeat Councillor Lee's thanks for coming there and sitting and listening to these questions. You've got an easy time of it. I mean, as I said, this is my first time actually chairing CEP, and I've only been here once before. I've come from the heady hell of the committee that's EPH, and I tell you what, you have an easy time sat there. This is a fantastic bunch of councillors, so they definitely have put you through a good treatment. So I think the comments I've got from this that I need to sum up, and my fantastic companion Ellie will correct me if I'm wrong here. We have a strategy paper on carbon offset that Councillor Williams had asked for, but is going to be circulated to all councillors. We had one other action, which was also
Strengthening communities.
You're correct, yes. So Tom is going to forward the Strengthening Communities strategy to Councillor Lee, which I believe we are looking to...
Send it on anyway.
Oh, was it Councillor Williams? I do apologise. We'll send it to everybody. There you go. Fantastic. We have the power. And then the last wrapping up comment there, Councillor Lee, thank you for your hard work. We'd hope that it could be shaped to be more of a strategy than a plan and look to bring it back. And I think the intention is to bring it back to CEP anyway, so we will discuss that. Have I misquoted anybody? Have I missed anybody out? Are we happy to move on to the next section?
I just appreciate things like natural environment, biodiversity come up a lot, and I discussed that with officers this morning. I think, Tom, am I right? We're bringing green infrastructure strategy early next year, aren't we, back to this committee? So I think we'll be able to have some more detailed information and debate around biodiversity at that stage.
We're doing the work programme after this. You're welcome to stay if you want and listen into it. But Councillor Tuck, I think you must get your hand up.
I think, Chair, did you capture that we wanted that, the green table, which has all the metric tonnes of this, that and the other, could we have that as like a project plan which shows how we are actually getting to net zero? I think the officers nodded at the time. But it wasn't on your list?
I have captured that now, so yes, yeah, we have that done. Fantastic. Have anybody else any other concerns and comments? No? Okay, so fantastic then. So I propose that we're going to move on to... Oh. Fantastic. Okay then, so we're going to move on to section 6 now, which is the work programme. Everybody can clear the building that doesn't want to sit and stay. I won't be offended, don't worry, it's only my first time. Apparently it's happy hour. That's, yeah. Okay, so we're going to go on to the work programme here. Now, everybody is aware, this is my first session chairing, so I absolutely can turn around as using as excuse. You can't blame me, boss. I wasn't here when this was previously done. So if I'm going over any old ground, I'm going to apologise now, but I just need to get up to scratch with what the work programme is. Please don't be offended if I'm asking anybody to revalidate why we're bringing something forward. I was sat with Ellie yesterday, where we sat and looked at our schedule. So because Councillor Golding is off on maternity leave, I'm going to plan out until July, I think, which is most probably fair to do. So we have 4 meetings coming up: 18th of January, 23, 15th of March, 14th of June and 19th of July. So we've got 4 meetings coming up. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take what has been proposed and work out from the committee what their priorities are. So what you'd like to come forward first. Now, I think it's 8 o'clock now, so it's about an hour and a half it's taken us to go through one paper there. So I would most probably recommend that perhaps we look at just doing 2 sessions per committee, unless the officers will be able to guide us whether or not they think it's a light one and whether or not we can squeeze a third one in. So ideally what I'd like to do is prioritise what we think we want to bring forward. And then we can sit down with Ellie, because obviously there is a requirement on the officers to actually do the work to bring it forward for us. And there's also a piece of work on whether or not, what task do we want to do? Are we actually scrutinising the end result and holding portfolio holder responsible for it, or are we wanting to shape and inform? Because I think that also has a lot to do on what stage we want that work to come forward from. So if I look at the if I look at the items that have been proposed and when they've been suggested to come forward, in no particular order, we've got the Community and Voluntary Sector Grant Funding Review. Now, this is coming to CEP on the 18th of January 2023, and the rationale for that is that it's going to Cabinet in December. It needs to go to Cabinet because we need to get the budget in place. Now, the statement that's come out from that is we are not reducing the budget, so there isn't any concern there. So the work that CEP can still do with that paper that comes forward is help to actually shape and refine the criteria for organisations that need to apply, that want to apply to this funding. So hopefully that's acceptable for everybody, and hopefully the 18th of January is acceptable for bringing that forward. Does anybody have any comments on that one? Councillor Compton-Brown.
Thank you. So the issue I have with lots of these is that they're linked. So, for example, when you're looking at the community and voluntary sector grants, you have to refer to the culture strategy and the strengthening community strategy, and various other things. And Tom probably knows way better than me what's linked to what, which probably then dictates what we need to talk about first. Does that all make sense? So I'm just worried about talking about the grant funding review if we haven't already talked about the cultural strategy, which it refers to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to say that what we are funding has to link directly to what is the new emerging council plan, but also in terms of those approved strategies, whether that's a strengthening community strategy or the cultural framework. So what was set out in the Cabinet paper recently was the sort of revised approach to how that funding, the strategic funding, would be administered, if you like, moving forward, in a much more simplified method of making sure that we can direct that funding to the organisations that we think are best placed to deliver against those priorities. So I think the intention of the paper in January is to bring back the detail around those particular schemes that will continue, to get your thoughts and input in terms of, because you'll know from experience this year, I'm sure, what's worked well, where we need to improve and simplify some of the grant funding arrangements, so councillor grants. You'll all have direct experience in terms of how that's administered, and thoughts and suggestions on how that can be improved. So the intention is to come back with that sort of, get your views on how we can sort of shape and direct that funding.
Yeah, so just to feed into that specific point you've got, so the feedback I've had with regards to the cultural strategy in particular was it had originally come to CEP back in March when the framework was being developed. The cultural compact that was agreed off the back of that is in the process of getting set up, and the first introductory meeting would be week commencing 12th of December. Now, what officers have recommended is to bring that back, if CEP want to bring it back, is late spring, early summer, because that would effectively give us a good inclination of the take-up and the value that that's doing. So I guess I absolutely get what you're saying about how we feed in so that we get value for the papers that we're bringing forward. But the other thing is, as well, it becomes a little bit of a chicken and egg. So I think I absolutely take on board what you're saying, but I think because the community and voluntary sector grant is looking to go live before we could most probably bring the cultural strategy back in to review it, it's most probably more beneficial to have it in that order that we'd proposed of bringing in January. But I absolutely get what you're saying, and it is a valid point. What we can do is we could most probably send out an update of the cultural strategy to councillors before we come in anyway, as an appendix, as an addendum, so that we have that latest updated policy on what we're doing. Yeah. Councillor Lee?
I was just going to refer to your initial question around how we want to approach these, and I certainly believe that we should be here to not just to kind of scrutinise the end document and say yay or nay. I think we certainly should be here to influence, shape, and help construct the policies and strategies that go with it. So if we can get sight of them earlier, so that we can then influence the direction and then get them returned at some point, when they're needed, that would be ideal.
I completely agree with you, and it was some comments that I was having. I'd had a pre-meet with some of my colleagues prior to this, and the comments that were made was that trying to shape a policy just in a committee meeting in the time we've got allocated to this, that doesn't really work. And I use it as an example, the task and finish group that had been set up in EPH with regards to bringing forward the proposed motion shaping the policy about protecting rural villages. And that was an example really of where the committee were able to take a piece of work and then effectively work outside of the committee for it. And certainly I know that the colleagues that I was speaking to were absolutely for that. So I think and this is, do you know what I mean, I'm new. Do you know what I mean? I'm looking to the team here really, because that's what we're here for. This isn't main chamber council and politics, right? This is about us working together to do that scrutiny and committee bit. So if that's how you want to work it, I'm absolutely happy where we can set up these task and finish groups as well outside of committee to help and run some of these things forward. Because at the end of the day, we're here to help the cabinet as well, because they have a lot of work on their plate as well. Councillor Williams, yes, sorry.
Thank you very much. Could I make the same point as Councillor Burnett about the links between the various items? It seems to me that the local recreational needs assessment and the built sports facility and play and pitch strategy are very much linked. They're very much out of date. The last play and pitch strategy was done in 2015. I believe the work is quite advanced on that, using external consultants. I don't know how much scope there is then to shape it, but it does seem to me that would be something that's worth taking early. I also think in relation to that, in terms of this committee, I'd rather sit longer and deal with linked subjects than keep deferring them.
And thank you very much. I didn't want to stop you in mid-flight there, sir, but you've stolen my lines, because that is further along. So don't worry. Absolutely, we'll get to that piece. So
people will be talking. I don't know if that's a compliment.
Yeah. So to finish off that one, so we're happy. Community and voluntary sector grant funding review is going to come forward in January. Okay, that's something that I'll work with Ellie to bring that forward. The town centre strategy. So we're going to go on to the next one here, because again, and this is where I've tried to look back into the history of what was brought forward. So my understanding for this is that the town centre strategy actually went to EPH on the 17th of March, an update report, and the strategy itself is actually going to Cabinet for adoption in December 2022 in this year. So I think the first question is, do we want it to come to CEP? And the second question is, what do we hope to achieve if we do bring it? And then the third one really is more a point. So this is where, again, as part of my learning how to be a chair, I have a quarterly scrutiny meeting on Thursday where I sit down with all the other chairs and with the head of scrutiny. And I take forward to him my proposals for our work programme. And it's effectively that chair of scrutiny that can turn around and say yes or no, and can divert it to something else. So it may be that the reason why the town centre strategy didn't come to CEP was because it went to EPH. But I will ask that question anyway for that one. But I guess over to members, do you want to see the town centre strategy come forward again? And if so, what do we want to achieve from it?
I guess I want to make a comment, but I think we're kind of too late, because I've noticed that I've come to Cabinet and documents were said to be going to CEP, and actually it turns out they were going to EPH or somewhere else. I'm starting to wonder, like, why is it going to one place and not like communities, environment and partnerships, right? That's surely our piece. Is it because scrutiny is diverting it off to EPH? And I know EPH, I'm sure you'll be able to say even more than I can, their workload is horrendous compared to this. And we had a meeting cancelled previously because there was just nothing on the agenda. So I'd like to make sure that the documents that are being lined up come to the relevant committee, rather than EPH be overloaded and us sat here twiddling our thumbs going, so nobody's using us, we're here to help.
Yeah. So, I mean, the intention of the sort of chairs' meetings, with the cabinet members is to agree, where these particular reports are best, and to try and balance out the workloads between committees, which I appreciate EPH is not always that easy. But with the town centre strategy, it was certainly felt that it was so integral to those discussions about housing numbers, that that was really the request as to why it should go to EPH. We are in a position where we're trying to avoid it going to two committees where we can. So that was the rationale, I think, on that one as to why it ended up at EPH. Yeah.
So, I mean, I would want to back up what Tom says as well, is we don't want to recreate work, and we don't want, I think, personally, committees to be conflicting against each other. So I think, and to me, I think that's why the chair of scrutiny is an opposition councillor, right? Because that gives you that non-political ability to be able to route things, so that it's not a political game of passing things through committees. But what I plan to do is that when we come up and when we agree with something from this, and I go to the meeting tomorrow, I will pass that feedback back to everybody so that you're all involved, so that we have a programme of work scheduled, quite frankly. And again, I'll be challenging the fact that we've had a meeting cancelled. And exactly what you said there, Councillor Lee, as well. I mean, I think we play quite a fundamental role in being able to help keep Cabinet to account, but also help to shape and influence that direction, I think, for our committees.
I think also as well there is a piece around, it's a new process, overview and scrutiny. So we just need to be clear on when things are suggested for CP, that they are, and they decide to go to EPH instead, that we feed back and just confirm what's happened, which gives obviously the committee an opportunity to attend that meeting or read those papers.
So if everybody's happy, I'm actually going to propose that we don't bring the town centre strategy forward, because I don't think there's any value to this committee, and we will have the opportunity to debate it at full council anyway, I think. So if everybody's happy with that, that's an action that we'll take. Okay, so the next one then is the cultural strategy, which was back to Councillor Councillor Tuck.
But just before you go through the whole list, I still see green infrastructure strategy is omitted, just so that you've got it in your head.
It's on my list. Don't worry. There was one omitted, and I'll look to whoever it was to remind me of that as well. But don't worry, green infrastructure strategy is on my list with a plan. Cultural strategy. This was presented to CEP back in March, as we'd said before. The officers recommend bringing it back in late spring, early summer, because that way we'll have some good sound evidence of how the compact is actually running. And I think that will be a scrutiny action, really, because the process is in place. The cultural compact will be delivering to the cultural strategy, and that is where we can do that scrutiny to make sure that that's actually working. Is everybody happy with that suggestion that it comes late spring, early summer? Okay, fantastic. Strengthening community strategy. This is the one, the report I've had, the draft strengthening community strategy was updated to take on board the comments from CEP on 16th of March this year, and the final strategy was approved by Cabinet on the 5th of July 2022. Now my question is, do we want to bring it back to provide us an update for it, and if so, what do we want to achieve from that? Again, focusing on the thing that, rather than creating work for the sake of work, is there any value that we see in this? Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. So, yes, I would love to see it again, but my understanding is that there's a massive piece of work going on with the council officers to look at all the different strategies and how they link, like play shaping, for example, is probably in the strengthening communities, because some of the strategies now are sort of redundant because they've been replaced by something completely different. So it would be really helpful with things like strengthening communities if we made sure that it had all its bits that fed into it, so that we could look at it as a whole picture once you've done that piece of work. And I'm not sure what the piece of work is called or how far you've got with it, but it would be lovely to hear about that, and then we can use it to inform our work programme as well.
Okay, we'll take that away, and I'll come back to you with an update and where it's getting proposed to fit into the work programme. The next one then is the community assets and needs assessment. And the officers have told me there's no completed work programme request for this item. So what I am going to ask, and it is only an ask because even though I'm chair, I've got no power to compel, but what I would ask is that when we want to submit something to bring it to CEP as a piece of work, that we do complete that work programme request, because it actually lets officers understand what it is we want to achieve from it, and it allows them to bring forward the correct information from that. And it doesn't need to be War and Peace. I've seen some really good examples of ones that have come in, and I'm sure we can share them out if anybody wants a template to see what they need to fill in, the detail that's required. Councillor Williams, yes. Yeah.
Could you just give an indication of what that covers? Is it an item that's come to CEP before and CEP has expressed a view about it?
Yes, sorry. So I was getting onto the community assets and needs assessment. I was literally just talking about making sure that we filled in that work programme request. So the community assets and needs assessment. So again, the point we got on, there wasn't a completed work programme request. So whoever had asked it to come forward, if you want it to come back forward again, we will complete that work programme, hopefully. And the report we've had is currently we are working with the new portfolio holder for communities to review the approach to the community assets and needs assessment. Officers would suggest that an update is brought to CEP in the summer of 2023 regarding the proposed approach to that community assets and needs assessment. So effectively, we've got a new individual in the chair who is looking, I think, to shape it a little bit themselves. So it may be that if we look to bring it forward now, are we actually going to achieve anything before they actually are read in to the portfolio? or are we happy taking the officer's recommendation and bring it in summer 23, which would be around about the June or the July one, where I think we've most probably got a little bit more opportunity to get some valuable answers out from the portfolio holder at the time. Any comments?
Sorry, Chair. Ask the idiot question. Is a community asset a village hall? What are we thinking when we say a community asset? Is it a village hall or a library or some green space? I'm a bit unclear.
Okay, it's kind of intention is a holistic look at all of the community assets. So yeah, you're right. It could be a community building of any shape or size, but also just in terms of the groups that exist within those communities that support residents. So it's a holistic look at what exists in those local areas and to support communities. But yeah, there was a paper that did come to CEP. Wasn't involved directly myself at that point, which sort of set out the sort of intention in the framework and a pilot approach that was going to be followed. And you know, clearly we are working with our new cabinet member on revising that and bringing that forward. So, yeah.
Councillor Compton-Burnett.
It sounds like the perfect opportunity for us to do some shaping. So perhaps we could find out, I mean, it might be that earlier rather than later is good, because then we can work with the portfolio holder and what they're doing and bring some ideas together so that it doesn't arrive as a fait accompli, please comment on this. We can actually be part of the process.
So, I think obviously we'll keep it on the work programme, and I think that's a conversation that we can have about the timing and when to bring that back. So you're absolutely right. It's on the work programme, and we can bring back a paper to get the views of CEP on what they look like moving forwards. Yeah.
Councillor Lee.
Sorry, did you say there's already something out there that we can read on this? Because to be honest, I'm a little bit confused as to that explanation as like community assets, because as Councillor Tuck said, like park, green space, community groups, that's a wide-ranging topic of discussion that sounds like it's wrapped up in every other strategy as well.
What I'll do is I'm not sure the date when it was brought to CP previously, but I'll find out when that report came back, and obviously that sets out the context in terms of what that piece of work entails. So I'll make sure that's circulated just to show there's clarity about what the intention was.
I think that would be appreciated, best, especially with the chair's vision of doing work for work's sake and not kind of just revising a paper that to me doesn't make sense at the moment.
I tell you what then, how about if we get the paper recirculated to all councillors and we put it on an item to discuss for the work programme in January's meeting to see if we want to bring it forward based on the report that we've read, and perhaps even get a quick update from an officer on the current progress from the paper that we have, and then we can schedule it into the programme, I think. Councillor Morrow.
This is actually quite close to my heart in my ward, because we have a Basingstoke owned building that they're going to sell, which was put on the market, which we managed to make an ACV asset, a community value. And so it's quite important, I think, what the council do after it's on that ACV, because this building is still going to be disposed of by Basingstoke and Dean, and there's no process, there's no policy to do it, so that's sort of something after. I imagine the paper that you're talking about is how you ascertain if something is an ACV or not. Is that correct? And then I'm a bit interested in this because we're still going through it, and really I want to know, I would like it if the officers had a clearer path of what to do with a building like the one in my ward, and rather than it being made, it's actually a cabinet decision that's going to end up the future of the building in my ward, and it is it's very vital for the community, this building, so it's something that I'd certainly be interested in. whether it deserves to be further up or not is, that's a group decision, but yeah.
So I'll tell you what I'll do then, and I'm happy to volunteer myself forward for this, because there's no completed work programme request for this item. So I'm happy to complete the work programme request, and listening to the committee, what I've heard is you want to shape what the portfolio holder is doing, and you don't want it to be a fait accompli. So I will put that in the work programme request, and I'll give it to the officers so that we know that when a paper that is in a state to come to us, it cannot be that fait accompli, and it needs to be absolutely for us to give feedback into the shape and the direction of where it wants to go. Is everybody happy with that proposal? Yeah, is that okay? Yeah. The next one then is the EDI review. And unfortunately, the only update I have is a waiting update from Sue and Sarah, so I shall pass across to Tom to give us an update, if you have one.
Unfortunately, I don't. Again, I think this was one where we didn't have a work programme submission, but I believe it was discussed at one of the previous meetings.
Councillor Mamaladi?
Yes, there was a EDA program was scheduled when Councillor Walks was the chair. That was removed from this list when Councillor Golding has taken over. And now I asked for it, what happened to that? And then they introduced again the ED on. So I'm not really sure what happened to that one.
I think, again, it's one of the, clearly there's an intention to bring this back to CEP, so we will just take that one away, and as an officer group, we need to come back to you probably at the January meeting to say when that will be scheduled. So, yeah, unfortunately, I haven't got an update for this meeting, but clearly that one needs to stay on the work programme, and we'll come back to you to confirm when it will be scheduled.
Okay, Councillor Mamalani, are you happy then that I move this on to January as an agenda item for the work programme for us to discuss there, so that we can schedule this in for work? Is everybody else happy with that recommendation? Yeah, okay, fantastic. We'll move on to the next one. Green infrastructure strategy. No, that's not important. We'll move on, won't we? So the green infrastructure strategy. Officers would suggest bringing this to CEP in the summer of 2023. This will enable time to update members on progress and action to address the priorities within the new council plan. Are we happy with that timeline, or do we have any comments? Councillor Tuck.
Sooner is better, but that's okay.
Councillor Lee?
I would say that obviously summer 2023 is a new election year, and making sure that these do stay on the list for then more than anything. Obviously I'm here for 4 years anyway, but it's just in case the next, you might have a replacement after today's showing, just to make sure that they do stay on the list for those sessions.
I hope I haven't done anything to beat 45 days in office, but yeah, no, and I can reassure you, Councillor Lee, that you're going to be looking at me for 4 years across the council chamber as well. So, however, I mean, yeah, I'm temporary. I am keeping the seat warm for Councillor Golding until she comes back. I'm planning out until July, because I think that's a sensible time to plan out to. You have my word, if this goes on the work programme for June or July in the summer, then it will come forward, quite frankly, unless officers have a very good reason for why it hasn't come forward, quite frankly. Councillor Tuck.
It's a very good point, Councillor Lee. What about April's meeting?
We don't have a meeting in April. We've got a meeting in March, June and July.
March is sounding jolly good.
I think we need to take the scheduling offline, because I think the other thing I'm conscious as well is the commitment on officers to get something substantive to us by then. And I think we also have to be aware as well that we're not the only committee putting demands on portfolio holders and officers. So what I absolutely get what the committee is saying. They want it to be brought forward as soon as we can, and I will pass that back, and we'll do a scheduling session offline. But what, again, I'm conscious of as well is that I don't want to overburden officers or get something that most probably isn't fit for purpose to come here to committee. Councillor Tuck.
So the only point I'd make, Chair, is it's really important that our GI is updated before our local plan heads off into consultation mode.
Okay, I'll note that. And again, as I said, if we aim for summer, I think 14th of June is most probably what I'll aim for. Tom's nodding next to me. And I think that does come prior to the local plan going out for consultation. So that's what we'll aim for if everybody's happy with that. I mean, I appreciate, we do have to work to the demands on our officers, and absolutely we do want to bring it forward so that we can scrutinise this as well. So I'll aim for 14th of June if everybody's happy for that, and it is coming forward. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Tuck, I know you're happy. So the next one then is going on to addressing Councillor Williams' very valid points. So we've got three here. We've got the local recreational needs assessment and built sports facility. And we've got the playing pitch strategy. And then we've got the leisure and community centres review. So we've got three items that are actually pretty fairly well linked. And the report that I've had back from officers, because I have been working before this, do you know what I mean? I have been reading into it and doing a little bit of work and understanding what this good committee does. So the advice that that I've had come back is that the LRNA, the Local Recreational Needs Assessment, provides an evidence-based study regarding the future needs in the borough. That then informs the built sports facility and playing pitch strategies, as well as the emerging local plan. Now, the LRNA will be published along with the updated built sports facility and the playing pitch strategies early next year. So what officers are suggesting that we have a member workshop to discuss them then. A member workshop, is that a committee meeting or is that an out of committee?
It's out of committee, yeah.
Okay, so that we have an out of committee meeting workshop to discuss them. And that will go over the consultation that took place to inform the LRNA. So I'm envisaging something like the leisure park strategy that we did in here, and the findings and how they are all carried forward into the revised strategies. Does that sound acceptable to members? Councillor Williams?
In the minutes of the last meeting, we did ask for a workshop on the leisure park, and one of my questions I was going to ask an AOB is, when do we get feedback ever in relation to any request like that? Because clearly it's needed. When we had the presentation on the leisure park, the slides were difficult to read, but one of the slides did make clear that consultation would continue. Despite consultation in February and March of this year, consultation would continue in November. And prayed in aid of that was Basingstoke Today would cover that. There was nothing in Basingstoke Today about consultation. So I've got a general point really. Is this workshop a shaping workshop? Or because this is my concern about my experience of this committee, is that we make comments but we're not always clear about what happens to those comments. It may be that as a new member, I'm not following that up enough. It's gone forward to Cabinet and decisions have been taken. But really, I want to make sure that we're picking up things that are said here, the request for a workshop. Another workshop comes up. Is that linked? Is that separate? Are we going to have two workshops?
So Democratic Services are in the middle at the moment of producing a recommendation tracker. So across all the committees, recommendations and comments will there be tracked. So there will be an audit trail of what the response was or what the outcome was, and that will go to every meeting of those committees, so you can see quite clearly what's happened.
Okay, that's brilliant. What is the response about the request for a workshop on the leisure park mix?
We are waiting for a response from the portfolio holder, but I will chase that one up.
So my third. One that will shape it, or one where we're just sat back and we're listening?
The LNRA is, it is an evidence-based study, so we have to adhere to lots of national governing bodies, set standard approaches to how we assess the need. So it's a consistent model that's applied across the country in terms of how that's done. So that will be just an opportunity to understand how that gets conducted. Obviously, members' views are sought as part of that, so you may well have contributed at the time, I don't know, but again, it's just to give you an understanding of how the LNRA approach works and what the outcomes from that are. I fully expect that we'd probably bring on board the consultants that supported and delivered that piece of work, and then moving on from that, it's to understand how that has influenced the existing strategy. So at the moment, you've got the play, pitch and the built sport facility strategies, which run up to 2025. And obviously this is it's a 5-yearly review, the LNRA, just to check whether or not that is still meeting the needs, of those, at that time. So again, my understanding is there are no significant changes to what was set out in the current adopted strategies. But again, part of that workshop will be to look at that and to understand from the evidence base what's being proposed in terms of those strategies.
Councillor Williams?
I'm sorry, I'm not happy with that approach. The LNRA is based on quite old information. I think there should be an opportunity to shape it. It doesn't automatically flow from an evidence-based approach that the conclusion that's actually reached in relation to any evidence that's been collected, that conclusion is the right conclusion. And I think there should be an opportunity for this committee to shape it, not merely hear about how it was done, etc., etc.
Well, my understanding of it's not my area, just to clarify, but my understanding is it is a set approach, a standard approach that's applied consistently across the country as to how we should conduct that evidence-based assessment of the need. And again, it's recent. I mean, it was only done last year, wasn't it? So, that has been updated. I think the commitment is to facilitate a workshop where we can discuss it in far more detail with members, all members, an open invitation clearly to all councillors to understand what's come out as a result of that work.
Okay, Councillor Williams, keep it light off. I'll give you an opportunity to speak, but just let me replay what I think I've heard, which is where Tom has turned round and said it's an independent assessment that has to follow a set of strict guidelines. The outcome of that is used to measure whether or not our existing strategies are actually fulfilling their need. And I'm assuming that if that LRNA had turned around and said you're failing your strategies, that would have kicked off a piece of work to refresh our strategies. So I appreciate, Councillor Williams, that you have a differing viewpoint. Perhaps what I suggest, shall we look to do the workshop? Shall we look to hear out the officers? Shall we keep this on the work programme, which means that if the committee aren't satisfied after the work, after the out of committee meeting, we can then look as a committee to ask for it to be brought back again, but at that point we will shape what we're hoping to achieve. Is that acceptable?
That may well work. Can I just give an example about why I say even though it's an evidence-based approach, that some of the conclusions reached may not remain relevant. So, for example, the LNRA bases itself on earlier work done by the Football Foundation and the Hampshire FA and the Council. The conclusion was that Basingstoke and Dean needs 5 new full-size artificial grass pitches. I don't disagree with that conclusion, but where those pitches should be located is an issue on which I think this committee should have input in relation to future developments. And one of the developments that we talked about was that EPH passed a motion that a football stadium should be considered and constructed at the leisure park. Now, clearly, having a Basingstoke Town Football Club favour an artificial grass pitch, that could be the future location for one of those pitches, as opposed to a dubious site that was previously proposed and I believe would still be in the evidence-based LNRA report.
No, I was just going to add, I think it's a perfectly valid point that you've raised, and I think I would like to see the report in front of us in an out of committee meeting, so that all councillors can digest it, and then I think we'll look to see whether or not we want to bring it back and shape it. Because I think you've raised a perfectly valid point. If document says you need 5 of this, well, where do the 5 go, and what committee helps to shape that? How does that feed into? And I think that, I mean, that to me almost feeds back into the role of scrutiny of this committee. If we have a report that says you need to deliver 5 football pitches, and our playing pitch strategy only has accommodation for 4, as an example, then that is something that we can challenge. Why are we not meeting to that? Or if we actually think that our playing pitch strategy is out of date after the updated evidence, then I think at that point we can ask the portfolio holder to come back in and ask them what their plans are with the strategies and help to look to shape them if necessary. Is that acceptable?
Thank you very much. I only want 4, I don't want 5. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other comments then on Councillor Compton-Burnett?
Sorry, just a very quick comment. I'm totally in favour of what you suggested. I think it's a fantastic idea. Could we please have the LRNA in plenty of time so that we can read it well before the meeting, so that we've got some useful comments to come back with, please?
And one other question, would we envisage actually opening this up to all councillors rather than just CAP? Yes. Yeah, because I think that would be beneficial as well, so we get it's a big document. Yeah, so I think that would help. We invite all councillors to the presentation, I think, because that will most probably help to shape some of the conversation around it, and then at CAP we can then decide what we want to do as a next step from that. So if everybody's happy with that proposal, I'll move forward on that one then. And then the last one is the last but one, because there's one that's missing, and Councillor Tuck is going to pick me up on it, hopefully. So the last one I have is the Leisure and Community Centres Review. And the comment that came back from officers was that there was no work programme formed for this item. So this is an example of where they actually need to understand the nature of this request. What are we asking for with that Leisure and Community Centres Review? So I don't know if anybody recognises this one. Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, I might be wrong, but I recollect a discussion where councillors possibly at this committee expressed concern that the council might want to sell off some community centres, and we're looking for assurance as to whether that was the case or not. I'll stand to be corrected by anybody else who recollects something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that reflects on that conversation that I mentioned a bit earlier in terms of the draft strengthening community strategy, where certainly there was strong views expressed in March from the committee about the possibility that we were seeking to to not directly manage some of the community facilities, and obviously what we did was reflected on that. That was, as I say, that was never the intention, but we absolutely picked up on all the comments that were made, that it appeared that way in the way it was set out. As I say, it was very much just an enabling approach. I mean, it's not without, some community organisations may desperately want to run the building themselves, and it just really setting out that we wouldn't be. We needed to set out an approach where how we would consider such requests, because clearly we want to protect the facility and its future operation to the benefit of the residents locally, but conversely we need to make sure that any organisation that did seek to take on a building that we currently own and manage directly, is one that's going to stand the test of time, as it were, in terms of being financially resilient and so on. So it was so we have changed it, and the updated strategy reflects that position, hopefully a bit more clearly. And as we've said, we'll circulate that published strategy to all of CEP after the meeting.
Councillor Williams?
Doesn't it sit naturally with the Community Assets and Needs Assessment Review? If that's been taken in summer 2023, wouldn't that cover leisure and community centres as well?
Yeah, so your mic, yeah. I think that's just what we're trying to identify. What was it coming forward? So absolutely, we could wrap that into the community assets and needs assessment piece. So that's what I have on my list of items on the work programme. Now, I do know that one of my colleagues had pointed out that one was missing. Can they remember what it was? No. Oh, there you go, Councillor Compton-Burnett. I knew something.
I think it might have been me asking about the strengthening community strategy, but we've already covered that, so that's perfect. Thank you.
There you go. Okay, so that's all the ones that I've identified. Has anybody submitted something and it's been missed off? And this isn't new items. This is anybody submitted something that hasn't been missed off? No? Okay, fantastic. So I think, obviously, I think this is good enough for us to plan out into the summer, with most probably a space for a couple of sessions that we want to add in. One thing I noted was that we're also the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee as well, so I don't know whether or not anybody's got any ideas on anything that we'd want to bring forward for that. Speeding in the borough or something like that. There's an idea that we can sit and think about and see whether or not we want to bring anything forward. And again, I think if anybody has any other thoughts on what they'd like to bring forward, then I would suggest bringing it forward for January's meeting, where we'll still have a work programme item on the agenda anyway, so we can discuss that and look to see if we can shape anything in. But Councillor Mackay, yeah.
No, just I recall the local police officers coming to the committee before and making a presentation just around where their priorities were and so on. And I've not been on the committee long enough to know, but I understood that that was a regular feature of the committee. So it would be useful to make sure that keeps its place.
Yeah. So if everybody's happy with that, again, I'll volunteer myself with that one to sit and work out with Ellie what that looks like, and see if we can get the officers on board here and have a chat with them about the sterling effort that they're doing within our community. If nobody has any more to add to that one, then I'm happy to suggest we move on to that one, and I think that is close of business, isn't it? I mean, I just want to say you've been an absolutely fantastic committee. Do you know what I mean? Thank you very much for such an easy ride of it coming through here. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you all. And Mr. Vice Chair, have you got anything that you want to add? Do you want to address the council? I'm quite happy to hand over to you, sir.
It's nice to be recognised that this is a cooperative committee, and long may it continue. Thank you.